Much to discuss, and who better to do that with than Ian Stewart, Chief Economist at Deloitte, and Larry Elliott, The Guardian's economics editor. Gents, many thanks for coming in. Nice to see you. On the basis that you're so influential, George Osborne calls you tomorrow and says, OK, give me one do and one don't. What would it be, Larry?
Well, I think he's got to stick to his plans. I think that for George Osborne, he's made his bed, he's now got to lie in it. I can't see any real virtue in George Osborne changing horses in midstream. I mean, the economy is obviously in quite a weak position, but you know, he's made his plans. I think if he was to suddenly say, well, I've changed my mind, he'd lose a massive amount of credibility. Yeah. So that's if I was.
So your do and your don't is do stick to your plan, don't change them. Ian, would you agree?
I'm afraid so, yeah. I mean, I think the purpose of this budget will be for the Chancellor to project confidence about his fiscal plans, that he's on course, and confidence about the future of the economy. I mean, in the last few months, there have been doubts about the sustainability of this recovery in this country, and I guess part of his role will be to say, we go on with the fiscal consolidation. So I don't think there are going to be fireworks, and I think it is all about confidence, not about new measures.
There is a phalanx out there, of course, of critics saying, he's got to do more, he's cutting too fast, he's cutting too deep. Do you think?
Well, I think he probably is. I mean, I think he probably is. I think it is a very risky strategy. But I mean,
well, let me just put this to you. Yeah. Do you not think that we are sort of suffering from deficit debt fatigue here, in the sense that people have got used to it, the big numbers are out there, the roof hasn't come in, and the critics can say, well, life isn't so bad after all. The debt numbers and the deficit numbers are still very serious, aren't they?
The deficit numbers are serious, but if the economy tanks in the second half of this year, which it could well do, then the deficit numbers are not going to get any better. So, I mean, I think that, when I say Osborne should stick to his strategy, I think he has no choice but to stick to his strategy. I don't actually think that the strategy is a particularly good one, because I think we are cutting very fast and very hard in an economy which is still incredibly weak. I mean, my view of the economy is that, it's all we've really done is move the debt from the private sector to the public sector. We had a big debt problem. We moved it from one part of the economy to another, and we had a very, very concentrated economy in a few sectors, all of which imploded back in 2007, 2008, and we are not over that problem.
What do you think, Ian? Do you agree?
I think it's absolutely the case that what was a private sector debt problem is now a public sector debt problem. I mean, I'm slightly more sanguine about the pace of fiscal tightening, in that I think that as a result of the crisis in Greece and to a lesser extent Ireland, I mean, the terms of the debate have shifted in quite a big way. I think that at this kind of stage, he has no choice but to press ahead.
And it's going to be difficult, but it's a 5-year run if the government stays in power. Shouldn't he be judged after 5 years, not after every single job loss in the public sector?
I think from George Osborne's point of view, you might as well get the bad news out of the way early in the Parliament for two reasons. One, because people forget, as you said, in years 4 and 5, they sort of remember it, but they don't remember too much. That's the hope.
As long as there is a pickup.
As long as there's a pickup. The other thing is that for about the first year, 18 months, you can blame it all on the last lot. That period is sort of coming to an end. I think by the time the next budget, people start to say, well, look, we've judged this guy on his own record, not on what Gordon Brown did. So I think for the time being, he can still say, this is all Brown's problem, I'm here to clear up the mess. I hate doing it, it's all terrible thing to do, but actually, it's not my fault. That's time limited, that strategy.
What do you think, Ian, how long does George have to blame the last lot? I mean, in the city, the rule of thumb is normally 1 year. Well, that's nearly up.
Well, I think he's going to make use of the rest of this Parliament to dump on the previous government. I think their big political challenge, actually, is they're going to be running an economy in which government and the consumer, which have been the engines of growth the last 10 years, are going to be incredibly weak. And it's all about rebalancing the economy and shifting towards capital spending in the corporate sector and manufacturing, all that good stuff. And that's a great idea, but it's a political experiment to try to get re-elected, having spent 4 or 5 years with the consumer and with government spending under the cosh. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Now, Larry, I'm going to promote your excellent book, Fantasy Island, because in that you pretty much dissected the government spending under Brown and Blair. And what you said was really much of the economy was a fantasy because it was all built on spending money we didn't have. And yet here you are now saying to George, well, you know, he shouldn't tighten. Well, isn't he trying to address the problem that you identified?
I think he is, but you've got to take it at a reasonable pace, I think. I mean, I think that you can, you know, what's essentially happened is they've taken a weak, the last government took a weak economy, filled it full of drugs in the hope that it would stagger forward. And, you know, the question is how hard do you want to make the cold turkey? I think at some point, obviously, we've got to get the debt down. The question is, do you actually push it back into recession by doing it too fast and too hard? And that is the big debate of the next 12 months. If he gets this wrong, then Ed Balls will be all over him like a rash and saying, look, you know, we left the economy, it was growing, the deficit was coming down, unemployment was coming down, we've given you the economy for a year to look after, you've clobbered it with, you know, with massive spending cuts and tax increases too quickly, and you've pushed it back into recession. If that happens, then Osborne's gamble will have failed. If he gets it right, then a second Tory government will be there in 2015.
Well, make a prediction here. A second Tory government, what I'm really saying is, will George get it right? Will all these numbers add up in 4 or 5 years' time?
My guess is he'll meet his deficit target, and in 2 or 3 years' time the economy is going to be growing about trend, but it's going to be a very different kind of growth. Like politically, that's quite difficult if the consumer is still pretty weak, which I think it probably will be. All right, guys. Larry, nice to see you. Ian, thanks for coming in. Speak again at the end of the week.